Hey everyone, and welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts.
Great to be here.
Today we're going to dive into a really interesting paper that's trying to push text-to-image generation forward, specifically using flow matching models.
Yeah, these flow models have become, really dominant lately. Super impressive image quality.
Definitely. But they do sometimes struggle, right? Especially with complex prompts, maybe multiple objects, specific arrangements, or even just getting text right inside the image.
Exactly. That text rendering part is notoriously tricky.
And we've seen online reinforcement learning, RL, do some amazing things for large language models, improving their reasoning. So this paper asks, can we use that same online RL power for these flow matching image models?
In the paper Flow-GRPO, Online Reinforcement Learning for Flow Matching Models, basically gives a big yes. They introduced this method, Flow-GRPO. It cleverly mixes group relative policy optimization, GRPO, with flow matching.
Okay, GRPO.
Yeah, and there are two core ideas. First, they figured out how to take the standard flow model, which is deterministic based on ODE's ordinary differential equation.
Right, predictable.
And turn it into a stochastic one using SDEs, stochastic differential equations. Adding that bit of randomness is really crucial for making the online RL work properly.
Makes sense. RL needs to explore a bit.
Precisely. And the second big insight is efficiency. They realized they could massively cut down the number of denoising steps during the RL training part.
Oh,
without actually hurting the final image quality you get at the end when you run it normally. And the headline result, they took stable diffusion at 3.5 medium on this benchmark called Evol.
Yeah.
From 63% accuracy all the way up to 95%. That's even better than GPT-4o managed on the same temp.
Wow, 63 to 95, that's a massive jump. Okay, so obviously applying RL directly wasn't straightforward. What were the main sticking points they ran into initially?
Right, it wasn't just plug and play. There's sort of two fundamental conflicts. First, like we touched on, flow matching is usually deterministic. It follows this fixed path, the ODE.
Like a recipe.
Exactly. Always the same output for the same input and steps. But RL needs that exploration, right? It needs to try slightly different things, different actions in the image generation to see what gets a better reward. That needs randomness, some stochastic sampling, which just isn't there in the basic ODE setup.
Got it. So it's like you can't learn to avoid puddles if your shoes are stuck on rails.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The second issue is efficiency. Online RL needs data. Lots of it. It learns by generating images, getting feedback.
Right.
But flow models often take many, many iterative steps to create one good image. Doing that over and over just to collect RL training data, it gets incredibly expensive, computationally speaking.
Yeah, especially with these huge models. Each sample takes time and compute. Okay, so how does Flow-GRPO, this new method, actually get around these two big problems, the determinism and the inefficiency?
So it really hinges on those two key strategies we mentioned. The OD2SDE Conversion and the Denoising Reduction.
Okay.
The OD2SDE part directly tackles the determinism problem. The core idea is, if you want RL to work, you need some controlled randomness.
Right.
So they mathematically transform that deterministic ODE into what's called a reverse time SDE. It injects noise, but in a very specific way, so that the overall results, the kinds of images you get out, still match what the original model could do.
Okay, so they're adding noise, but carefully. Why exactly is that randomness, that stochasticity, so important for GRPO, the RL algorithm they chose?
Well, it's essential for a few reasons in GRPO, and really any policy gradient RL method. First, advantage estimation. RL figures out how much better one action is compared to others.
Okay.
To do that, you need to compare slightly different outcomes, different generated images from the same prompt. If it's deterministic, you only get one outcome. No comparison possible.
Right. Second, exploration. The model has to try different ways of making the image to find better strategies that get higher rewards. Deterministic means no exploration, just repeating the same path.
Stuck in a rut.
Pretty much. And finally, the math behind policy gradients often requires calculating the probability of taking an action, like the probability of generating a certain intermediate noisy image. Deterministic processes don't really have probabilities like that.
Okay, that makes total sense. So how did they actually do this conversion? You mentioned it in equation.
Yeah, so they start with the basic ODE, then they build on some prior work that kind of unifies flow and diffusion models, and they construct this reverse time SDE. The key equation, equation 11 in the paper, looks like dxt equals some terms involving the velocity vt plus this crucial bit, STW. The W represents the Wiener process, basically tiny random kicks at each step. That's the noise injection. And SAC controls how much noise gets added at time t.
Okay, so that's the continuous math. How do they actually compute with that? They use a standard method called Euler-Mariama Discretization. It just breaks that continuous SDE down into small, discrete steps the computer can handle.
Right, step-by-step updates.
Exactly. And this gives them a rule to update the image, blending the original model's direction with that added randomness. A neat consequence is that their policy, how to go from one step to the next, becomes a simple Gaussian distribution.
Why is that useful?
Because it makes calculating something called the Kale divergence really easy. That's needed for the RL objective function. They also define that noise level as a times the square root of t times. A is just a knob they could turn.
It's a hyperparameter.
Yeah, a hyperparameter to control the overall amount of noise.
Okay, got it. So that handles the randomness. Now, what about the second challenge, the inefficiency from all those denoising steps?
Right. This is the denoising reduction strategy. And it's pretty clever. They basically found that during the RL training phase, you don't need the full number of steps.
Really?
Yeah. For stable diffusion 3.5 medium, the baseline uses T40 steps for inference. But for Flow-GRPO training, they found they could get away with just T10 steps.
10 instead of 40.
10 instead of 40. And the crucial part is, even though those 10-step samples are lower quality, training the RL policy on them still improves the final high-quality images generated using the full 40 steps later on.
Wow. So it's like you don't need a perfect photorealistic sketch to give feedback that improves the final painting.
That's a perfect analogy. It dramatically cuts down the compute needed for RL data collection, making the whole thing much more feasible.
That's a huge practical win. Okay, so they've got Flow-GRPO with these two clever tricks. How did they test it? What benchmarks did they use?
They set up a pretty thorough evaluation across 3 different kinds of tasks using different reward signals. First was compositional image generation on the Genevol benchmark.
Genevol.
Yeah, it's designed to be tough. Lots of prompts like a red cube behind a blue sphere, testing object counts, spatial relations, attributes, that kind of thing.
Okay, complex stuff.
Second, visual text rendering. Basically, can the model accurately draw text from the prompt, like a sign that says hello?
The classic hard problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for these first 2, they used rule-based rewards, simple checks like, did it get the count right? Is the text correct?
Gotcha. Automatic checks.
Then third, and this is important, they tested human preference alignment using PIC-score.
PIC-score predicts what humans would prefer.
Right. It's a pre-trained model that acts as a proxy for human judgment. This test was key to show Flow-GRPO isn't just limited to rule-based rewards. It can also align with more subjective human-like preferences.
Okay, makes sense. So let's get to the results. What happened on Genevol, that compositional benchmark?
The Genevol results were frankly stunning. Like we said up front, they took SD 3.5 medium from 63% accuracy overall up to 95%.
Just incredible.
Yeah, and that 95% beat other strong models, including GPT-4o at 84% and another one called FLUX.1 Dev at 66%. And it wasn't just one specific subtask. They showed big gains across the board: counting, positioning, color binding, attribute binding. Figure 1a in the paper shows this nice steady climb in performance during training. And Figure 3 has some great visual examples. You can really see the difference Flow-GRPO makes. Much more accurate images.
Very cool. Okay, what about rendering text? Did it help there too?
It absolutely did. They measured accuracy based on like the number of correct characters generated versus the number requested. SD 3.5 medium went from 59% accuracy up to 92% after Flow-GRPO training.
Another huge leap. From 59 to 92 is massive for text rendering.
It really is. It shows a much better grasp of integrating text correctly.
Okay, so it nails these rule-based tasks. But what about the more fuzzy, subjective stuff, aligning with human preference using PIC-score?
That worked well too. Using PIC-score as the reward signal showed that Flow-GRPO could indeed improve alignment with predicted human preferences. It demonstrates the method's flexibility. It's not just about following explicit rules, it can learn from these more nuanced model-based reward signals too.
That's important for general applicability. Now, whenever you optimize hard on a specific reward, there's this worry about reward hacking, right? Like the model finds a cheat to get the reward score up, but the actual image quality goes down, or it only produces one kind of image. Did they see any of that?
That's a super important question, and they looked into it carefully. They tracked standard image quality metrics, things like aesthetic score and the Q score, using a general benchmark called Drawbench.
Okay.
And what they found, shown in Figure 1b in Table 2, is that these quality scores basically stayed the same, or even slightly improved, after Flow-GRPO training.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and Figure 1C also showed that the human preference scores on Drawbench went up. So it looks like they got those big accuracy gains on Genevol and text without sacrificing general image quality. Minimal reward hacking, it seems.
That's reassuring. They also mentioned something called Kale Regularization being important. What's that doing?
Right, the Kale penalty, the standard tool in RL. In their objective function, equation 5, it basically measures how much the model's policy, its strategy for generating images, is changing compared to the original pre-trained model.
Okay, so penalizes big changes.
Exactly. By adding this penalty, it encourages the model to make smoother, more stable improvements. It helps prevent it from suddenly doing weird things just to chase the reward, which could lead to, ugly images or losing variety.
It keeps it grounded.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Figure 4 in the paper actually shows examples of what can happen without KL. You see quality drops and less diversity. With KL, things look much better. And they also show in Figure 7 that it's not just the same as stopping training early. The KL term actively helps guide the learning.
Interesting. And what about that noise level A they introduced with the SDE? Did tuning that make a difference?
It did. They found A controls this trade-off between exploration during training and the quality of the images being generated for that training data. If A is too low, there's not enough randomness, not enough exploration, and learning is slow. That's in Figure 5b. If you increase A, exploration gets better and performance improves faster, up to a point.
But if it's too high?
If it's too high, the noise starts to mess up the intermediate images too much, and the training can become unstable. So they found an optimal range. Around 0.7 seemed to work well, giving good exploration without wrecking the image quality during training.
Finding that sweet spot. Okay, these results on the specific benchmarks are great, but how well does this generalize? Does it work on things it wasn't explicitly trained on?
Yeah, generalization is always the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the paper shows some really positive signs. In Table 4, they demonstrate good performance on object classes within Genevol that weren't part of the training prompts.
Nice.
It also generalized to unseen object counts. Like if it trained on prompts with 2 to 4 objects, it could still handle prompts asking for 5 or 6 objects reasonably well.
Okay, that's promising.
And even more impressively, Table 3 shows results on a different, more challenging benchmark called T2I Compedge plus Belby. This contains objects and relationships quite different from the Flow-GRPO training data. The fact that it still showed significant improvements there really speaks to the robustness and generalization power of the method.
That's strong evidence. So looking ahead, did the authors talk about any limitations or where this research might go next?
They did. They acknowledged, this work is focused on static images. The big frontier is video generation.
Right.
And that brings new challenges. How do you even define a good reward function for video? You need temporal consistency, maybe action recognition. It gets complicated fast.
Yeah, way more complex.
Plus, how do you balance multiple rewards if you need to optimize for different aspects of the video simultaneously? And then there's just the sheer scale. Video is so much more computationally demanding. Scaling Flow-GRPO effectively for video is definitely a major future work direction.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's wrap this up. What are the main takeaways from this Flow-GRPO paper?
I think there are a few key things. First, it's really the first time someone successfully integrated this online RL algorithm, GRPO, with flow matching models for T2I. They solved that core determinism problem with a ODE-to-SDE trick.
Yeah, that was clever.
Second, it really proves that online RL can be a powerful tool here, driving significant accuracy improvements in complex generation tasks like compositionality and text rendering. Third, these gains came without wrecking image quality, largely avoiding reward hacking, partly thanks to that Kale Regularization.
Crucial point.
And finally, the denoising reduction strategy is a big practical win, making this kind of RL training much more efficient and, frankly, possible.
It really does sound like Flow-GRPO is a significant advance, using RL to boost these already powerful flow models.
Absolutely. It pushes the state-of-the-art for text-to-image, especially for accuracy on complex prompts, and it definitely opens doors for future work, especially as we discuss towards video.
Fantastic overview. Thanks for breaking that down. And for everyone listening, here's something to think about. How could these core ideas from Flow-GRPO, adding controlled noise to deterministic systems using RL with smart sampling, maybe be applied elsewhere? Could they help with other types of generative models or tackle different problems we see in AI generation today? Definitely some food for thought. That's it for this episode of AI Paper Podcast. We'll see you next time.